I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity to present Robert Tercek to this group.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you to my friends at NASPL, Tom, John, Tanika. I'm happy to be back talking to you. Thank you all for getting up early. I know you're probably going, who is this guy? He better be good. I got out of bed an hour early to hear him talk. So David mentioned my motto is inventing the future. There's a famous computer scientist named Alan Kay. And he said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. I love that idea. I think that's a great idea. It's true. Today, if you have an idea for a business, if you have an idea for the way the world should be, you have the opportunity today, unlike any other time in history, you have the opportunity to go out there and create that vision of the future and implement it. You're seeing that every single day in the news. I got excited about this because I think there's some amazing stuff going on in the world. So earlier this year, I taped a series of specials, videos that were interviews, consisted of interviews with some of the people at the bleeding edge of technology and science. And I thought I'd start today by telling you about these things because it's so amazing. It's mind-blowing stuff. You've all heard about 3D printing, right? This was a big story last year. Just about every magazine had this on the cover of it. The idea is that there are these new kits that you can buy that cost less than $2,000. The price is coming down pretty fast. Now they're about $1,000, sometimes even less. So a home hobbyist kit for 3D printing. And some analysts predict that what we saw happen in the 1980s with desktop publishing, where people started to connect a printer to their computer, now they're going to have home manufacturing, desktop manufacturing. So that's kind of the principle. That's why it's an exciting idea. It's still very early days. Does anybody have a 3D printer? Has anyone seen one? Anybody in the audience? So they're very slow, they're very cumbersome, they require a lot of care and feeding. They're kind of a hobbyist thing right now at home. But 3D printing, additive manufacturing is actually a really, really big deal, and there's a lot of cool stuff happening with it. So even though we're at the very early stages of home desktop manufacturing, and that may or may not evolve exactly as the analysts predict, what we can say for sure is that 3D printing is a real deal. It's a really big deal. Let me show you a couple examples. So the principle, the main idea they think for home manufacturing is that we'll be able to download and print out replacement parts. So if something breaks in your dishwasher, instead of writing a letter and going to the warranty and trying to get the company to send you a part by mail, you can download the 3D instructions to your computer and then just print out that replacement part at home. You hear about that, you sort of go, so what? Why would I need that? Like, why is that important to me? Why am I going to go buy a $2,000 appliance to do that? That particular idea doesn't really grab the imagination, but this one does. So there's a group in Chicago, in Illinois, that is developing an open source car. And it's a 3D car, so you can actually design and print out the car chassis of your choice. So that's kind of an interesting notion. So these things can scale up to very large size. Does anyone know what this item is, this gnarly looking thing? This is a replacement human jaw that is anatomically precise. So what they could do for a patient who needs jaw surgery, where they're going to replace the jawbone, they can do a 3D scan of your head, and now they can make a 3D part, a replacement jawbone that is anatomically precise, so it fits exactly back. Why does that matter? Well, think about it. If you get sort of a standard issue part for your jaw, your face is going to be different after that surgery. That would be traumatically shifting, right, for people. Your face is your personality. You can imagine how hard that would be for someone who had to have that painful surgery, and then they wake up afterwards and their face looks different. Now they can actually replace it. You're going to go back to normal. You're going to look exactly the way you looked before. It doesn't end there with replacement bones. This thing is an anatomically correct human liver. Now, it doesn't work yet. They haven't gotten the vascular part figured out. That will take a few years to do. So we may not have replacement organs printed on 3D printers for a few years yet, but we're getting very, very close. They can already produce skin. So they use a 3D printer. It's additive printing. It just lays down a layer and another layer and another layer and builds up a surface. They can do that with human skin cells as well on a 3D printer. And so scientists predict that within 10 years, we'll be able to take some cells from our skin and build new organs, like a replacement heart for someone. This is kind of mind-blowing, right? You hear about that and you go, oh, now I get why 3D printing is such a big idea. That's amazing. And this isn't science fiction. This is absolutely happening right now. These are things that are happening right now. It's not just 3D printing. Material science is the science of all the things that we buy. It's the science that makes it possible for us to make smaller computers and smaller mobile phones and flexible screens, and so forth. And there's amazing breakthroughs happening with material science right now. A lot of it is stemming from nanotechnology. You've heard about nanotech for a couple of years, right? For 10 years, we've been hearing about it. Now we're starting to see the results. You may have heard of graphene, which is a brilliant new material. It's a conductive material. It's going to allow us to build really lightweight, very strong things. I just learned of this material, nanocellulose. Nanocellulose. It's stronger than steel. It's lighter than carbon fiber. It has the ballistic properties of Kevlar. It's bulletproof. It's transparent, it's conductive, you can send an electrical signal through it, and it comes from trees. So it's actually cheap and sustainable. It's a renewable, it's a green new technology. You can use it as a gel, you can use it as a liquid, you can pour it, you can cast it. It's an incredibly flexible new material, brand new material, and it comes from trees, so it's a sustainable thing. So this is like an incredible breakthrough in material science, just one of many. Every day there are announcements of this sort breaking through. And one last one, this is perhaps the topic I'm most excited about. I'm going to just talk briefly about it, but this is one I get really passionate about. A few years ago, I made contact with a group of scientists in the field of synthetic biology. And if I were a young man in college right now, this is what I would be doing with my life. I believe this is going to emerge as the biggest new field of science. So what's happening in science is they're now using the computer. They're applying the computer to every field of science. If you think about biology, when we were in high school, biology was a wet science, right? You had to wear a lab coat, there were beakers and stuff, and you were pouring liquids, and things were bubbling away and percolating away in a jar. That's over now. Now it's all done with computer science. So they use computers to model out DNA. And they're actually programming new DNA. They're writing new code that will go inside of the cells. They're programming the human cells, they're programming biological cells the same way we would program a computer. And what synthetic biologists think of, they look at the cell as a miniature supercomputer, and so they look at the DNA as the script, the code that runs that computer. So they'll compose new DNA on a computer, and then they send it out to a lab, and the labs have all these new ways to synthesize that particular genetic sequence, and then they'll remove the DNA from a bacterium, and they insert this newly written DNA, and lo and behold, they've created a new organism with new genetic code that will replicate and grow, and they can actually program biology the same way we program a computer. This is a mind-blowing thing. What do you do with it? Well, one thing they're doing is they're taking algae, which is very easy to grow and it replicates very quickly. They reprogram the algae to secrete a special oil, a custom oil. And so you might get a scientist from the pharmaceutical industry who says, I need an oil with these properties, certain type of properties, for a cosmetic treatment or a skincare treatment. Another scientist will come and say, I need a certain type of oil for jet fuel or rocket fuel. And they actually get these huge vats of programmed algae secreting exactly the kind of oil you want. So this is a sustainable, renewable energy source. It comes from biomass. It's super cheap. It's still not at the level where it's going to compete with the oil industry. That's light years away from us right now. We're at the early stages of this. But it's quite interesting to know that every air fleet in the United States, every private and commercial air fleet in the United States is now using oil, jet fuel, that is grown from synthetic biology. So this is another field that's growing super fast. You'll see advances here in the food industry, you'll see advances in the pharmaceutical industry, and as I mentioned, in energy. These are some huge industries that are going to be shifted by that. So what do all these things have in common? Well, what we're doing is we're taking techniques from the software world and we're starting to apply them to the real physical world. We're literally reprogramming the world at the molecular level in nanotechnology, at the cell level in synthetic biology. So you could summarize all that by saying we're turning information into physical things. We can now design physical things on a computer and we can manufacture them, even down at the level of nanoscale, at the level of a molecular particle. I think that's kind of an amazing way to start. I hope I'm not boring you this early in the morning. But even as astounding as the stuff I just told you is, it is astounding to me, there's something even more astounding I want to share with you. That's the flip side of this, turning information into things. The flip side is that we're turning things, physical things, into information. And we've all had experience with that, right? When you download an app to your phone, what you're downloading is something you used to have to go to a store and purchase as a physical product. Now you're just downloading it as an additional capability for your phone. So we've all gotten into that habit. We haven't really remarked on it too much. It's quite amazing. 20 years ago, Nick Negroponte, he was the director at the MIT Media Lab, and he said, move bits, not atoms. Bits are electronic bits on a digital network. Atoms, of course, the physical stuff that we put on trucks and warehouses and ship across the country. It costs a lot of energy. It costs a lot of money to move physical products around. Bits are cheap to move. They can move them fast and electronically. So moving information around is a lot faster. So the more we can start to separate the information qualities out from physical things and start to sell the pure information, well, that's a really big business opportunity, and that's happening across the board. We've reached a kind of vanishing point where whole businesses are starting to disappear. You may have noticed this. We used to have a record store, right? Every neighborhood, every town had a local record shop that looked kind of like this if you were in some bohemian college town. Today, those record shops look like this. They're gone. Try to find a record. I live in Los Angeles. Tower Records was like an icon. You drive down Sunset Boulevard, it's gone. It's just mind-blowing that these stores have vanished. We used to have video shops. They looked like this. Today, video shops look like this. They're all going out of business. They're closing. You don't need them because you can now stream Netflix right into your house. Why go to the store? Why have to pay a late fee on a DVD that you rented? Why buy a DVD? You don't even need a physical product anymore when you can get the video on demand over the digital network. That's what I mean when I say ship bits, not atoms. So today, when we buy things in a store, this is what we mean by a store, the iTunes store, which isn't like any store we've ever dealt with, right? You folks deal with retail. That's a really primary concern of the lottery operator is the retail environment that you're in. This is the current retail environment that a whole generation is growing up to expect, and they get it on their phone, so they have that with them. I spent a lot of time working with retail businesses last year outside the United States. They're getting devastated because what they're finding now is people are walking into their stores, the high-end fashion malls and so on. They're walking into the store with a smartphone, and they're literally shopping in a different store while they're in the store. How do you combat that? How do you deal with it? That was the question I was presented with last fall, and I had a lively series of engagements on that topic all over the world. So they're competing with these kinds of stores. It isn't limited to media. So when I worked at Sony in the 1990s, I got to see all the stuff that was happening with the internet. And these guys from Cars.com came in and they said, you know, Rob, someday you're not going to have to go out to a lot and buy a car. You're going to buy it on the internet. I was like, give me a break. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm going to test drive a car. I'm not going to do that on the web. How do you replace that experience? And so, the way you buy a car, the way we grew up buying a car, is you went to this place and you talked to this guy. And he sold you a car, right? And you sort of felt like, am I getting a good deal from I have no idea if I'm being treated right or not. Well, today that's all over. You go on the web and you can do price comparison. And so as it turns out now today, more than half the people who buy a car in the United States do some sort of research, some step in the process on the internet. And the last 2 cars that I bought, I actually did the transaction on the web. I actually bought the car. I did exactly what they told me I was going to do 10 years ago when I worked at Sony. I've done that now twice in my life. So this is kind of the world that we're in. We're starting to get very accustomed to doing these transactions. Let's say you want to fly on one of these and you want to go to here, or you want to go to here, or you want to go to this place, right? So you want to travel somewhere. In the old days, you had to go to this shop, right? And you had to sit down with this guy. And he was going to fill out some paper, and you were going to give him some cash. Like there was this physical transaction that had to happen. Well, today, that's all over. Now you go to TripAdvisor, and you can look at the place you're going to visit, and you can read the reviews. This is the Bates Motel. Anyone remember Psycho? It doesn't get great reviews. I wouldn't recommend it, right? But that's the idea, right? Today, before we even go traveling someplace, we have a pretty good idea of what we're getting into, and that's completely changed the experience of travel. Suppose you work in a company, let's say you work in a company with good-looking models who stand in a conference room in front of a whiteboard making meaningless diagrams like this. Or maybe another company with these people standing in front of a whiteboard with making meaningless diagrams or something. Nowadays, if you walk around in companies, you'll notice a lot of the conference rooms are empty, which is really interesting. People are actually flying to fewer meetings. It's getting rarer and rarer to go to meetings because people are using online teleconferencing, and they're working with people, vendors, suppliers, business partners all over the world through video conferencing. And again, this isn't something that we think too much about, but that's a substitute for business travel. It's a substitute for the face-to-face meeting. It's not quite the same, right? It's not 100% of a replacement. You still want to meet the guy in person that you're doing business with. You want to shake their hand, look them in the eye. Of course, right? Of course. But this is an efficient way to keep in touch with someone on a day-to-day basis, and you're seeing whole companies pop up that run their whole teams that way. Okay, whoa, the women. All right, let's say in your own personal life, let's say you want to meet some women. You want to meet some bodacious babes, right? In the old days, what would you do? I'm here in San Diego. Hey, it's a nice night. Let's go out. So in the old days, you go to the lounge. But today, if you go to the lounge is empty. And the bars are empty as well. Why? Because everybody's meeting online. An increasing number of relationships are actually being made on the internet as well. So this isn't just a business thing. This is actually a personal and social thing that's occurring as well. We're literally vaporizing the places where we used to meet. eHarmony claims that they account for 5% of all marriages in North America. They're sort of a marriage-focused matchmaking site. But that's kind of astounding, right? 5%, that's like like a church that would claim to make that many marriages happen. So this is an amazing penetration into that aspect of our lives, I think. And then, of course, if you're already married, well, let's suppose you want a little action on the side. There's actually a website for that, too. There's always an app for that, right? So Ashley Madison guarantees that you're going to have an affair. How can they guarantee that? Oh, whatever. Yeah. And, of course, if you have like interesting predilections that you can't match up with in your particular town, there's actually dedicated dating sites like Pirate Date. So if you want to date someone who goes, "Arr," they have a website for that. And actually, all kidding aside, this is actually an important point. So one of the things you can do in digital media that you can't do in the real world is that you can get super micro-focused, right? You can have a niche interest, and you can match up precisely with that niche interest. And this actually turns out to be really powerful, particularly when it comes to social media. So everybody's got a certain set of passions or interests that they care a lot about. It's a big part of who we are and our personality. And the mass media world and the mass merchandising world and the mass marketing world, that works against that, right? The mass marketing world wants you to conform to some norm. It wants you to be like everybody else. It wants you to aspire to the same lifestyle as everybody else. What digital media allows you to do is niche into some area of focus that you've got, and you can meet exactly the other people who are interested in that niche. So all kidding aside, this is actually a real thing. This is a real thing. These trends, this trend of taking physical stuff and vaporizing it and turning it into something that's digitally delivered has come really hard in the entertainment business. It has struck us really, really hard. So I live in LA, I deal with the media companies all the time, and any company that sold a physical product, a physical media product, fixed media like a disc, this has been a really crushing blow because those businesses, we were kind of addicted to that revenue stream, and those businesses are starting to erode really, really rapidly. And as that revenue stream goes away, they're scrambling, those companies are scrambling to reinvent themselves as digital media companies that deliver digitally over the web. They're not all successful at it. And so as David said in the introductory remarks, you really need to ramp up. You have to get good at this. You need a little bit of time for your organization to make that transition. Take a look at this chart. This is a chart that shows the music industry and its revenue per capita, and the chart was done in 2011, so they kind of balanced it out for 2011 dollars. It starts in 1973. The blue is vinyl, so that was like kind of the heyday of buying LPs. The big yellow section, that's the CD. So you can see that in the 1980s, the CD began, and pretty much by the late 1980s, early 90s, it was the bulk of the revenue for the music industry. And the music industry was on a tear at that point. That was the absolute pinnacle. And they reached the peak of profitability and revenue in the year 1999-2000 at $71 per person in the United States in 2011 dollars. Yeah, it's a pretty big peak. But pay attention to what happened after that. You see, that year, 1999-2000, wasn't just the peak of the music business, that was also the year that Napster was introduced. And look what happened. In the last 10 years, we've seen this precipitous decline. The music industry's collapsed to about 25% of its size. Now they're in the process of reinventing music. They're shifting away from selling physical discs and downloadable singles, and they're starting to turn music into a service that you subscribe to, things like Spotify, Pandora, RDO. You've seen these services. You heard about them. If you haven't, your kids absolutely are using them. So people don't buy music. Now they subscribe to music. But it literally took the music industry 10 years and the loss of 3/4 of their business before they could actually make that change, before they were ready to make that change. There's a lot of psychological retuning that has to happen. People have to throw a lot of assumptions out the window about how their business works. So this is kind of like the diagram that says, don't let that happen to you. What's happened in the media industry is that we have become conditioned to sell the container as a proxy for the content. So that physical disc was what the whole industry was geared towards, right? We didn't think about it. The disc, that's just a delivery mechanism. The valuable stuff is the content that's on the disc, but we got so focused in selling DVDs and CDs, we got so hooked on that revenue stream, that began to be our belief system, that those shiny discs were what the whole business was about. It's not just music, by the way. You know, those shiny DVDs, that's also the heart of the television and video business, the home video business for the movies. It's also the heart of the game business, the console game business, because they also deliver on a shiny disc. So what's happening now is we're shattering that container. Right? Digital media blows up that container. It vaporizes that container, and the good stuff, the gooey stuff inside, can flow freely across the digital network, and that changes everything about your business. So you really have to think about that in your business. You have to think through, like, how much of your business depends on having a physical machine in a retail shop, or how much of your business depends on a customer buying a piece of paper, a physical piece of paper, versus the information that's contained in those machines or the information that's printed on that piece of paper. If you can split those two things apart, you get the idea, you know exactly where I'm heading, right? I see this clearly as the future for the lottery business. Whatever can be turned into pure information, digitally delivered, will. Any part of your business that can be turned into pure information is going to be. That's going to happen, whether you do it or somebody else does it to you. So you might say, well, wait a minute, what about TV? I work with a lot of TV companies, and they say, hey, TV, we're doing great, revenue's up, advertising sales is up, viewership is up, we're doing fine. We seem to be blissfully immune to this trend. This is the CEO who just resigned from Time Warner Cable, the second biggest cable company in the world. He resigned not for any particular reason, he's just an older guy, but he's a revered figure, and he said there's no such thing as a TV anymore, there's just a video display device. So they're starting to see a world now in television where every screen, whether it's a cell phone in your pocket, the tablet, or your computer in your briefcase, a screen that's in a store, a big window display, or even the television in your home, those are all places where their content can flow. But the TV business is not set up like that. So TV business is optimized to deliver to broadcast screens first or cable TV screens first, and then everything else is secondary. Now what they're having to struggle with is simultaneous release across all those screens. It's a traumatic shift for the TV business. In the meantime, consumers have moved on. Consumers have moved to new devices like tablet computers. I make the argument when I talk to TV people that a tablet computer costs the same as a flat screen TV, but a tablet gives you a lot more utility. Because I can watch video on it, but I can also carry it around. I can play games, I can take pictures, I can share photos, I can use Facebook with it. So it's a much more versatile device than a TV. A TV set hangs on your wall. You use it for 4 hours a day, maybe. The rest of the day it's just sitting there. It's just a useless piece of plastic hanging on your wall. No surprise then that the TV ownership, for the first time ever in history in the United States, started to go down 2 years ago. That's a really big shift in the United States. The television is about to go through what the music industry went through 10 years ago. Here's another example of that. For the cable guys and satellite guys, the linchpin of their business has been that set-top box in your living room, right? That's the gateway to control. And they've controlled your access to shows, the timing of the shows, the placement, the scheduling, the slots that the different channels have. They control everything through that set-top box. And if you think about it, that box hasn't really changed in 10 years. And it's got a DVR in it, but that technology is 13 years old, 14 years old. It's got video on demand, but that's about 10 years old now. There hasn't really been a big innovation happening. And that device is energy hungry, it's super inefficient, it's proprietary, it's totally closed. You can't download apps to it, you can't modify it. You as a user can't do much with it except flip through channels and then record shows. That's all it really does. So it's kind of a dumb box. Meanwhile, people are starting to get used to new devices. This is actually the wrong model. I should have the new one up. The new PlayStation, the new Xbox, Xbox One, is designed to replace all that gear in your living room and turn the Xbox into the hub in your living room, a digital hub to manage all the media in your house. It's actually a very bold move from Microsoft, and they could be successful. They have a project called Smart Glass that makes it really easy for people to migrate media from one thing to another, and all of it flows through the Xbox One in the living room. So that's a pretty powerful thing. Microsoft's been working on this for more than 10 years with the previous Xbox. Apple has the Apple TV. That's a little box. It's like a hockey puck sized thing, and it costs about $100. And it allows you to stream video from the internet, download things from iTunes, and show them on your television set. So you're starting to see them chisel away at that control point in the living room, that set-top box control point. And then Google has been working at this for quite a few years, unsuccessfully, relatively unsuccessful with Google TV. But just last week, they announced the new Chrome key, their a dongle. It's about the size of a USB stick. Let's see if I have one here. It's an amazing gizmo. So Google came out with a thing that's about this big called Chromecast, and you plug it into an HDMI port in the back of your TV, and it connects to Wi-Fi, and it can stream YouTube and internet video directly to your TV set. And so it bypasses the cable TV or satellite TV system altogether, gets you video straight from the web. And that gizmo costs $35, $35. Google's not going to make money on that. They're not trying to make money on that. What they're trying to do is get a foothold in the living room for YouTube, which they own. It's a brilliant move. So you can see these gigantic changes that are about to hit the TV business. It's going to be great for consumers because we're going to have more choice, more shows, more content than ever before. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's a wave of change happening. I consider it kind of a tidal wave of change. And when it hits you, you got to be prepared for it. You don't want the wave to hit you and then try to figure out what you're doing. What industries are next? Commerce, I mentioned before, they're going through this wave. It's tremendous, the amount of shift they have to deal with. The shift from selling products in retail to now they have a multi-front battle where they have to run these online stores, they have to have a mobile commerce strategy, and in addition, they have to fend off all kinds of new competitors that are coming into their store. So that's a giant challenge for retail. Advertising is going through a traumatic shift. In the front of the USA Today yesterday, there was a big article about how digital advertising is changing. The digital guys are starting to run the agencies, and it's no longer a creative business. It's now becoming a mathematical business. The healthcare industry is about to go through a huge shift. Silicon Valley picked this out. They sort of targeted this as an industry. It's highly inefficient, that has a ton of data in it, but the data is all bound up in things like notebooks and filing cabinets. So that's the kind of problem Silicon Valley loves to solve. And so they're going into healthcare with gusto because they think they can deliver more information more efficiently, better outcomes for patients. Which ones will be next after that? Universities, there's a massive initiative underway right now to reinvent the university. These massive online free universities that are happening called MOOCs. Legal services, if you know anybody who's an attorney, they're freaking out right now because there's a proliferation of cheap legal services available on the web. Government is a bloated, inefficient thing that hoards information. That is the kind of organization that Silicon Valley loves to target and explode, so you're going to start to see governments change. I was recently in Estonia. Estonia was a satellite of the Soviet Union until the early 90s, and when they came out, all their systems were super out of date, and there was a bunch of smart guys who were running the country, and they were like, what should we do? So they said, gee, let's try to create the first technology democracy. So they got state-of-the-art technology, and so it's a little tiny country with just about 1.2 million people, so it's not a huge country, but they're the most technologically advanced government in the world, and it is possible to reinvent government. If you think about the number of documents the US government has that we pay for as citizens, so they're sitting locked away in a file cabinet somewhere, you can't get access to them, it makes no sense, right? All that information should be available online for citizens to use, for private industry to build value around. The electronics industry is going through a traumatic shift as well. I'm not going to dwell on it. I can go on it. I'll go on in detail if I do. What do? Some of you are probably wondering, who is this guy? What does he do for a living? What I do for a living is I fly around the world and I work with companies that are going through traumatic change from digital media, and I help them develop strategies to cope with it. Sometimes they're large organizations. NBC, Universal, Turner Broadcasting, all of the French TV channels have hired me. So I work in different parts of the world with different kinds of companies. Last year I did a lot of work with retail companies and so forth. I also work with cutting-edge new companies, brand new companies. And frankly, this is really refreshing because they're not encumbered by a legacy business, so they can think freely about what to do. And it's really important to know that. Disruptive companies have no obligation to respect the business model of the industry they're disrupting. They can come up with an entirely different business model, so it's very freeing for them. I've launched a lot of stuff in my career. David mentioned on that. I've launched TV networks, game publishing companies. I launched the world's first video on mobile phones and online learning. And so that puts me in an interesting position to make some predictions for you here. So here I go. I'm going to put on my Swami hat and gaze into my crystal ball. If I were to predict what's going to happen with the lotteries in the next 5 years, I would predict that you're going to have the following things happen. Your online presence, your internet site, your mobile presence is going to turn into an app store where people can choose a whole bunch of game experiences. There'll be a broad catalog of games from a number of different suppliers, and you will turn into the managers of a huge inventory of games. You will also turn into the managers of a global developer network of suppliers who are bringing games to you. You're probably going to develop entirely new game experiences, things that are very different from the paper games and the terminal games you've developed in the past or that your vendors have supplied to you. You may be dealing with entirely new vendors, or those vendors that you currently have are going to change themselves. And I believe we're going to hear from some folks here today, or certainly at the next NASPL event. Your leading vendors in this industry are working very hard to start to bring these new game experiences with you. I'm aware of GTech, Sci Gaming, Intralot, other vendors are actually working very fast to develop these capabilities. The new games are going to be multi-platform. They're going to span mobile. They're going to be on tablets. They'll work on a computer, on a browser. They'll also have some physical presence because you're still going to have to deal with retail. They're going to involve elements of social, local, and mobile. There'll be combinations of free and paid games. I know you're probably going, why would we launch free games? I'll explain that in a minute. I will. And you're going to have to develop the capability to launch rapidly because that's what consumers expect. That's what they expect. Now, you might sit there and say, well, how can he make these predictions? I'm not a futurist. I don't consider myself a futurist. Actually, before I jump into that, this is what I envision games in the future for the lottery. They can look this good. I believe that you can have games that look like Warcraft, games that delight people and take them on wild adventures into new places. Right now, we have a vision in our head of what a lottery game should look like, and it usually has a bunch of buttons and numbers and stuff on them. And to me, that's not visually interesting at all. These are the games that people are playing in huge numbers on the web. The reason I can make these predictions is that I've been there before. You see, in 1993, I left MTV, where I had the greatest job in television. I had an amazingly fun job as a creative director at the most fun TV network in the world. And I left there to start a computer game company because I wanted MTV to get into computer games and get on the internet, and they didn't see it. They were a cable channel. They're like, we don't see why we need to do that. Now, of course, they're scrambling to figure out a strategy. But back in those days, they couldn't imagine themselves being in the business. So I left. I came out to California and I launched a computer game company that was very successful. It was at the very, very beginning of computer games. 93, if you think about 93, that was an important year. That was when the first color screens came to computers. So once you have a microprocessor and a color screen, you can put a game on it. And sure enough, those were successful companies. That company went public in 1994. It changed my life. I worked on console games. When Sony launched the first PlayStation, I developed products for them. I worked on the first online games, the first massive online games when I worked at Sony Pictures. I launched 25 games for them. Then I launched interactive television at Sony, which was very successful for Sony. What I didn't know at the time is that Sony was the only company in the United States that was profitable. My group was the only group that was making money with interactive TV in the 1990s. And we're starting to see a lot of those strategies get revived now with all those new devices that I mentioned a minute ago. So interactive TV is back. And then in 2002, I began launching mobile games, on mobile phones. And so I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. One of the lessons I learned is this is really hard, and I don't know why I keep launching new businesses. I've been doing this my entire career. It's kind of exhilarating, and it's kind of fun. But what I want to do now, the rest of the talk, is share with you some of those lessons. In 1994, when Sony launched the PlayStation, Sony was not in the console game business. It was dominated by Sega and Nintendo, and these two companies were powerhouses, and they had been for about 10 years. They seemed unassailable. And Sony came in, and they were going to launch the PlayStation. There was a lot of buzz around it, but game developers were like, I'm not sure why we should partner with them. There's a lesson for you guys here, so pay attention, okay? Because you have a company that isn't currently in the space, and they decide to enter the space. There are already big companies in the space who already have relationships with developers. What did Sony do? They seduced the developers. So if you were working with Sega or you were working with Nintendo in particular, it was very difficult to become one of their publishers. They were very picky about who they worked with. They didn't open their doors to just about anybody. They were very selective. Sony said, we're going to do it different. Anybody that calls that's interested in developing for the PlayStation, we're going to fly a technician down there. We're going to bring them a server, a demo unit. We're going to teach them how to do it. They did tutorials. They cranked up the most amazing developer program. And this is a super important lesson. The companies that succeed in these volatile spaces are the ones that build the big developer networks and treat their developers right, because that's where all the ideas come from, and that's where all the innovation comes from. You guys are smart, you know your business. I'm not going to tell you you don't know the lottery business as well as anybody. You surely do. But you don't have all the good ideas for games, and your vendors don't have all the good ideas for games. There are literally tens of thousands of game developers all over the world, and they're super innovative, super smart people that love to think about puzzles and games. That's what they do all day long. What you want to try to do is create a program that taps that creative energy and brings it in. Sony did this successfully, and this became the #1 best-selling console ever in history. The first Sony PlayStation sold 100 million units. The PlayStation 2 sold 150 million units. The PlayStation 3 sold, I think they're on track to sell 75, 78 million units. So Sony became the most important console game company, and they started by working closely with developers. Okay, so I went from that experience to online games. Now, the console game industry was very, very proud of itself in the mid-90s because it was a booming business. They were making money finally for the first time. It had gone from a very small cottage business in the 1980s, early 90s, but by the mid-90s, these were big companies, and they were very proud of themselves. But their whole business was like the music industry. They were shipping shiny discs that got stuck into a console. So it's just like the music business. Their whole business was focused on that product that went on the shiny disc. And I got into online games on the internet. Now, if you think back to 1997, the internet was pretty slow, right? We had 56K modems at that. There was no broadband anywhere. So you had to design tiny experiences. And the games looked kind of crappy. These were some of the online games at the time. As you can see, even the graphics were the screens were so low res, they don't even fill the whole screen. And I looked at that and I was like, this is terrible. Like, who's going to want to play that game? And so I was at Sony. Sony owns all kinds of game shows, and part of my job was to invent versions of those game shows for TV, for the internet. And so I did this with Wheel of Fortune. We turned it into this kind of groovy hipster Jetsons kind of thing where you could create an avatar. And we had a little tool where you could modify an avatar. And as you can see, we built chat into the game. So there's a little word balloon. You could actually talk to the other players and so on. You know, today you hear a lot about social in games. We were putting this in the games in 1997. And we did the same thing with Jeopardy. So this is how we reinvented Jeopardy in 1997. And the same idea. You had a host. That's the host down there. It's like Alex Robot, like Alex Trebek. He loved that. The same gameplay. We didn't monkey around the game mechanics because people understood those games very, very well. They liked them. The only change we made was we had to make it multiple choice because you couldn't let people freely enter text. That was just a technical thing we had to do. So we preserved the gameplay. We delivered on that part of the brand, but we reinvented the graphics. We changed it for this medium to do what you could do at that time, what you could deliver. The best visual experience you could deliver at that time were these flat graphics. We didn't try to get into 3D and so forth. Now, of course, since that time, games have gotten to be very, very rich on the internet. But back in those days, there was a lot of skepticism. So I joined the board of the Game Developer Conference in 1997. And when I got there were 25 people from the console game business, and they said, you know, we don't really like the games you make, and we don't really like you, and we don't really like the idea that Sony Pictures is here. We don't really like the movie studios very much. But we realized more people play your games in a day than play our games in an entire year, so we felt like we had to reach out to invite you to join the board. That was like the reception that I got from the game industry, so they were really resistant to it. And one thing I've noticed every time I launch these new services is there's always this kind of resistance, right? You have to surmount that resistance. There may be resistance in your organization or maybe at some level of the state that you're part of. There may be resistance to moving online. That's very common, so be prepared for that. Then I joined a company that launched mobile games, and this was fascinating. I had been working overseas, and I saw all these amazing mobile games. I wanted to bring them back to the US, so I created a company that distributed mobile games. The first mobile game was actually for this phone. I got this phone in 1998. This is a Nokia phone. That was kind of state-of-the-art phone in 1998. And you guys, does everyone remember this game? Yeah, Snake. This is the first game on mobile phones. So it took heroic imagination to develop a game for this screen because seriously, you have like one dot chasing a bunch of other dots on a screen, and that's supposed to be a game, but this was really, really popular. People love playing Snake. They've just created an emulator now for the new Nokia Lumia, like these super high-end smartphones that Nokia is making. They have a version of this game. It's sort of like a retro thrill for people. So that's where games were on mobile phones at the end of the 1990s. And then what I did in the 2000s is I worked with all kinds of companies, about 38 media companies, and I helped them migrate their brands over to mobile because they didn't understand the dynamics of the mobile industry. They didn't know how to do business with mobile network operators, companies like Verizon and Sprint and so on. That was a little bit of relationship building that needed to happen. And most importantly, they did not know how to develop for this particular screen or these particular devices. There's a lot of nuance in the mobile business, and that's still true today. And so I worked with these companies. I was their publishing partner. I licensed their content, and I put it on the phone, and that was a great big success. Now today we live in a world where the fastest growing segment of the game industry by far is mobile devices. And games like Clash of Clans, if you haven't played them, you gotta check these out. These are powerhouse games. And they launch in mobile and they stay in mobile. They're not going back to console. Now they're just bypassing console entirely. It's much faster to launch on mobile. You can make more money in mobile, and so that's changing everything. One example game everybody knows, Angry Birds, right? You've all seen it. 1.7 billion downloads since the game launched, 1.7 billion, 5 million hours of play per day, 30 million daily users, daily players, and 275 million people play it every month. These are huge numbers, right? So it spans the globe. Literally almost every cell phone, every smartphone has a copy of this game. They're not stopping with mobile games. I was in Finland recently, and I wanted to drop in because I know the guys from Rovio back in the day. I was friends of theirs, and so I thought I'd stop in and say hi to the CEO. They said, oh, they're all gone. They're in China. I said, what are you doing in China? They're launching theme parks. Theme parks, plural. So I called the CEO. I said, what are you doing in China? He said, oh, yeah. He goes, you know, Disney has a theme park here, but we think Disney got it wrong in China. They built one theme park. It's a big country with a lot of big cities. So we're building 100 theme parks around the country. We're putting one in every major city. Some cities are going to have multiple parks. Brilliant, right? So they're building the modern Disney in Finland around Angry Birds. It's astonishing, the ambition of this company. And recently, they launched Angry Birds Tunes. So they pushed out an update to the mobile phone, those 1.7 billion installed games. They pushed out an update. And in addition to the button that says play the game, now there's a watch button. And when you click watch, you can watch video. So overnight, they became a video distributor, one of the largest video distributors on the planet. They distribute now to 275 million viewers a month. So overnight, this company became a giant video powerhouse as well. That's what happens in this wacky world where you're delivering things over the air to mobile devices that can change so very quickly. Mobile turns out it's a perfect platform for paid content because it links everything that you can do on the internet with all the things that you can do in a retail environment. It's got payments built in, it knows your social history, it's got your contact information. It's a relatively secure environment, unlike a computer. It's a good place for transactions, and so it turns out to be a terrific place to do business. And you can see that consumers are extremely interested in mobile. Mobile has been growing like crazy in the last few years, but what I want you to take away from today is that mobile will continue to grow and grow and grow. It's going to very quickly become your primary screen, your primary point of contact, your primary transaction mechanism. When you ask American consumers, what gizmo do you want to buy, the first 5 things they mention are mobile. Sorry, the first 4. And then a connected TV is a distant 5, right? A distant number 5. But the first 4 things that people want, what they really passionately want, is an iPhone, a smartphone of some sort, a mobile device. Mobile apps are now starting to encroach on TV time. This is amazing. You've heard about the second screen and 2-screen and multitasking. So when people are watching TV, it turns out people that own a smartphone or a tablet or a computer, which is most people, 80% of us, when we watch TV, are using that device. And if you look around your living room, next time you're watching TV, you'll notice if it's not you or your spouse, it's definitely your kids, right? And they're on Facebook, or they're Vining, or they're doing something with Instagram, or they're doing some other thing, right? They're playing a video game, they're watching a video while they're watching TV. It's crazy, but we multitask. And it turns out TV is the second screen. The primary focal point is the engagement on that mobile device. Smartphone shipments, next year we're going to sell 1 billion smartphones. That's amazing. That's an amazing number. When I got into the mobile business in 1999, we were selling about 400 million phones a year. Now we're going to sell 1 billion smartphones. We already sell more than 1 billion phones a year. There are about 6 billion phones in use around the world. You might think, well, wait, isn't that almost the same number as the world's population? A lot of people have 2 phones, it turns out, in a lot of places. And so there's duplicate accounts. Some people have a business phone and a personal phone and so forth. But very quickly, you're going to see everybody has a smartphone. And that smartphone isn't just a phone, of course. It's a microcomputer in your pocket. It's got broadband access. It's a substitute for a computer. So I'd recommend that you really focus on that phone. That's a primary thing. Here's an interesting thing. Electronic Arts, the 3rd biggest game company in the world, game publisher in the world, they just did their financials this week, and they revealed that 76% of their business is from digital distribution. So retail is just going away as a channel for them, which is pretty important. And the second thing is Apple is their biggest partner. Apple. So when they look at all the companies that are selling EA product, how astonishing. They're doing their number 1 source of revenue from retail company is Apple. That happened in the music industry about 5 years ago, right? So the music industry used to sell stuff in physical music stores, and then as that channel descended, Apple rose, and people buying single downloads off of iTunes became the number 1 source of revenue for music. And the same thing's happening now in games with Electronic Arts. And their mobile revenue, year on year, doubled, $90 million for them from mobile games. So that's a pretty big category for them. Now, maybe some people in the audience are going, yeah, but hang on, Rob. All the stuff you're saying, lotteries are different, right? Wrong. These dynamics are going to affect every business. You know that, right, in your heart. Does anyone really think you guys are immune? I know you're a government-protected monopoly. You've got this kind of regulatory thing that makes your industry very, very unique. I respect that. I get that. I also understand that there's an art to managing a lottery and doing it well and doing it without any kind of scandal or issue or something, and you guys are experts in that. I have full respect for that. But these dynamics that I've been sharing with you for the last half hour, these are meta dynamics that span every industry. And they're driven by consumers who are empowered with new digital technology. And if you don't meet that demand, then they're just going to route around you and go to someplace else and get a similar experience. And there's lots and lots of substitutes. Every industry I deal with has blind spots, and it's my job to alert them to the blind spots and help them deal with the blind spots. I'm going to use my remaining time to talk about that. One thing about games is that they all have rules. They all have baseline rules. And I want to talk a little bit about those rules. We call them parameters, the parameters of a game. And there are 2 kinds of parameters. There are fixed parameters and there are variable parameters. The parameters are what make that game the same no matter where you're playing it or what device you're playing it on, right? So that's how we feel like the game is fair. We feel comfort. We feel a certain amount of certainty when we start a game. So even if you're playing tennis on top of the Burj Dubai, this tall building in the Burj Dubai, it's the same court, the same size court, the same racket, the same net, and so forth. So the game itself doesn't change. Those rules, the size of the court, the size of the net, the size of the racket, those are parameters, and those are fixed parameters. They're always the same. So in the lottery business in particular, you have mandated parameters. The number one mandated parameter is the prize payout, right? That's fixed by law, by your government. There's a regulatory thing that guides you there. And there are a couple of other mandated parameters. Now, we don't expose that in our games, but those are kind of like the baseline rules, and we're going to design a game experience around that. But there are also variable parameters, and I'm going to spend some time today talking about variable parameters, because these are the things you can tweak. You see, when we develop games, we design the game on paper. It doesn't matter if it's a computer game or a game for a console or a game for a phone or any other kind of game, even a paper game. You design the game initially on paper. You have an idea of how the game will be. Maybe you do some illustrations to draw like sort of screens or storyboards or something. All of that happens. And so you set out with the best of ambitions, and you start to build the game. And then the game is done, and it's working, but it's not quite right. And there's a certain amount of tweaking to do at the end. And that last process, what we call tuning the game, is super important. It's the 10% at the very end of the game development process that can make or break the success of a game. So a lot of what we think of as fun in a game is the variable parameters. Those are the little dials and knobs that you can turn and adjust to vary the gameplay just enough to make it fascinating and interesting. And I want to get into this topic with you because I'm really passionate about it. You folks already are familiar with this on some level. You may not have talked about it in that particular way, but if you just take a typical instant win scratch-off ticket, you'll see that there are mandated parameters. The first one's the payout, as I mentioned, but there's also mandated parameters. Everybody gets a card that's the same size. Everybody gets the card that's has the same number of choices on it, right? So the game doesn't vary by customer. That would be unfair. So there's certain rules that make that game consistent across the board. But we can change the art, we can change the brand. So here you have examples like Tetris, Harley-Davidson, Monopoly, licensed brands. Okay, so here's one variable that we can change, which is the branding, right? And that gives people a feeling of an experience that increases the entertainment value, and you've had some great success with that. I've heard some of the stories about the instant win games that have been branded and been successful. And sometimes we'll vary the metaphor. And so what we'll do is try to get people's imaginations engaged. So we'll give them a metaphor here, for example. A very common metaphor is to give people a casino metaphor, so they feel like they're playing one of those games, and then that appeals to a certain customer. They get excited about it. So in some way, we're kind of working our way towards this idea of mandated and variable parameters. You may not have exposed it in your thinking the way I'm about to do it, though. Now, what happens, though, is when we move to a new platform, we tend to think very literally. So we try to take that exact same game experience we did in paper, and we're going to migrate it over to a phone. That's okay. That's a first step. But I guarantee you that's not where you're going to stop. That may be the first step in. So you see companies like this one that are saying, put a mobile lottery terminal in everyone's pocket. Okay, but the news is, when people get that, the consumers aren't going to be that excited by that. That's not what they're going to the phone for. They're not going to the phone for the same experience they can get in the store. They're going for a different experience. So it's our job to figure out what can we do to give them that different experience. And you've seen examples like this, too, where you take the same interface that you would see in a terminal or on paper, and then you apply that to a phone or to a tablet. It's okay as a first step. I don't think it's the key to success. There's a secret to making games insanely fun. The secret is variables. Tune in the variables. I don't have examples from the lottery business to share with you. I do have some examples on my computer, but I'm not going to show those just yet. If you want, catch up with me later. What I want to do is talk to you about lessons from social games. Social gaming has been an area of intense innovation, intense amounts of innovation, and great things are happening there. One example, Double Down Casino, which is owned by IGT in Vegas. They are now doing cross-platform games. Remember, I mentioned to you a minute ago that you'll be doing cross-platform, multi-platform. They're introducing that. So they have a poker tournament that spans mobile, computers, browsers, and real-world poker tournaments. So they're doing a cross-platform tournament. That, to me, is kind of like the future, I think. You have this advantage of real-world play. You should take advantage of it. And by the way, IGT Double Down's revenues have doubled in the last year. Some people operate under the illusion in the media business that the revenue potential in internet is small. That's a mistake. That was true 10 years ago, but that's changing really quickly because there's just so many people now coming into digital, and it's so much easier to do a transaction. And so we're starting to see year-on-year revenue growing very, very quickly. So I took a couple examples of social gambling games. This is My Vegas from a company called Play Studios. I don't have any relationship with this company, so it's not like it's my game. I'm not trying to even get into that. That's not what I'm doing. I just picked this game because I thought it was a great example. That's all. It's a social casino game. And when I talk about variable parameters, here's what they've done. So think of a variable parameter as a way to gate access to a game, gate access to parts of the game experience. So you're going to show people that there's a broad game experience, but you can't go everywhere yet. It's a little bit like getting a ticket to Disneyland that lets you go to Adventure World, and you know there's Tomorrow World and Frontier World, but you can't go there yet. You don't have that ticket yet. You haven't earned it yet. And so what they do is they gate access in a bunch of different ways. They have featured games. So they have a sort function that sorts out the games, and they'll pick a few featured games. They'll place them more prominently. That's fairly obvious. Then they have level requirements down here. That means that they're going to show you a set of games that you can get access to, but you need more experience points. You need to play the game more frequently before you'll get access to those levels. Those levels unlock themselves as you build up experience. And so as you become a frequent player, you get the reward of getting access to new kinds of games. And then they have like exclusives. I'm referring to the Facebook like. So if you like a game on Facebook, if you like enough stuff on Facebook, that also earns you points that unlock special games or bonus features. Think about that. So they're actually basically doing a transaction with people saying, like our games, promote our games to your social network on Facebook, and we'll give you access to different game experiences. So these are examples of variable parameters where they're giving people a progression path. They're showing them that there's a map of experience to go through in the game, level by level, but you can't go there yet. They just show you the map, and they say, but you have to start here, and then you have to do this and this and this, and when you've earned enough experience, then we open up that other section. And so we're able to give people, allow people the ability to imagine themselves on a trajectory, but then we direct their behavior, and we incentivize their behavior, and we reward the good behavior, the behavior that's desirable, by unlocking levels of the game. You can also vary the pricing. Now you may think about it, wait, how can you vary the pricing? The prize payout is the mandated parameter. It's the one parameter we can't change. Well, that's true, but there's a lot of ways to prize people in digital. It's not just about cash. There's prestige, there's points, there's virtual currency, there's free bonuses, there's extended gameplay, there's unlocking new levels. There's a lot of ways. You're limited only by your imagination. And so the pricing here, at the top, this is also My Vegas from Play Studios. So there's a daily bonus. You get to go in and do a daily spin. Pretty simple, right? Well, let's think about that. Let's look more closely. There's a daily reward. If you play it every day, you get the ability for a consecutive win multiplier. So for people who are loyal players, there's a multiplier. That's the consecutive wins down here. They also have a like bonus here. So if you like this particular game on Facebook, then that doubles your bonus, or it increases the bonus in some way. If you recommend it to a friend, you get an additional bonus. And if they share back with you, if they recommend something to you or share it with you, you get an additional bonus. And so what they've done is they've found all these different ways to increase the experience of prizing, but use that as a way to entice certain behaviors, to incentivize certain behaviors. Now for people, this feels like entertainment. This doesn't feel like you're being manipulated. This feels fun. Vary the pricing. Here's a slot machine. If you think about a slot machine, you go, well, that's like the most basic internet game you can possibly make, right? You push a button, something happens, and you get a result. I mean, it's like there's not much of a game experience there. But these guys have managed